Okay, well, I'll build on that, both of you. Thanks very much. Mark, you started by alliterating with the letter C, with COVID, climate, and conscious consumers, which I thought was very clever. But I'm going to continue it and say, I think the fourth bit is, what do we choose to celebrate? And I think both Yorien and Rajiv have highlighted something. The first thing is these hidden heroes. So that's an H, but I'll come back. Hidden heroes in remanufacturing who are doing all this circular economy work, but are usually hidden. And we've got to try and bring them out to celebrate them. That's partly what we're involved in here. But why? And I want to point to one thing that the World Economic Forum has been doing recently, which is the Lighthouse Program. And McKinsey run the Lighthouse Program for the World Economic Forum. I strongly recommend you take a look at it. There are 69 lighthouses around the world. And these are basically factories that have adopted digital technologies to greatly improve resource efficiency. But my view is, well, please go and have a look. But my view is that this is not something to celebrate. Not anymore. It used to be. Because the lighthouse that the World Economic Forum are pointing to is simply the boundary of the factory. So it's the efficiency of the factory that's being celebrated. And that simply isn't enough. The rest of the world would say it must be more to it than that. Where have the materials come from that arrived in this factory? What product is being made and what happens to that product after it leaves? And my view is we should see remanufacturers as one of the lighthouses, if not some of the lighthouses in the future, because they complete some of that life cycle and extend it. But the metrics for lighthouses at the moment, in my view, are very narrow, don't deserve to be celebrated. That's my C, to add to yours, Mark. And we should reform what we celebrate as part of our building the circular economy. So that'd be my proposal. I hope that resonates with what you've said, and being able to highlight the role of product life extension through remanufacturing.
That's brilliant, David. I really appreciate that, and I do love that notion of celebrating, where we're going as well. I mean, there's been a lot of hard fought challenges, not only in the past year alone, as we know, but in the past decade, 2 decades, and we've all made enormous strides to get to a place where we have a more informed economy. And I think part of what I'm hearing in this conversation too is that we can't rest on our laurels, so to speak. We do need to keep pushing forward with action and innovation. We have to leverage and learn what we've done in the past, whether they've been past successes or mistakes in a sense. And we have to continue this advance of awareness and education so that we're bringing others forward. And I think the lighthouse metaphor is an excellent one. The notion of inside the fence, innovation versus what is actually happening in the rest of the world. And it draws for me also, David, this notion that, because I work in the energy industry and spend a lot of time thinking through circularity in that space, we're beginning to see this more informed beyond the fence metaphor play out. We could pick on Tesla, but there are other automakers. I'm convinced Tesla isn't so much about the car as it is about the energy life cycle. The potential for Tesla to be a net, power producer, a bilateral energy partner in consumers' lives as well as with the power grid. This longer view that energy storage and electrification with a focus on decarbonization for at the facility level inside the plant of a manufacturing facility where they're producing the cars, all the way through to where the consumer is driving the vehicle and perhaps plugging it in a commercial place or at their home. They're thinking through where that vehicle provides a value somewhere in its life cycle, and not just for the modality of mobility. And so it's not a perfect system yet, but I do think it's illustrative of this shaping of a new new, more informed economy around mobility that integrates or converges energy as the core value. And so there's this celebration, if you will, this rethinking of what is it that this product actually does for us, and where does this digital economy, because that's a beating heart of that marketplace, as you know, and one of the constraints that we're seeing here in the United States, but I know in other parts of the world too, is the accessibility to silicon wafers and microchips, and the role that they play in these new products. And so there's a rethinking around that aspect of the supply chain here domestically in the US, as you guys might be familiar with. But I'm also seeing that play out in the rest of the world. So the potential is there. I think that celebration is beginning to transcend other industries, some at a quicker clip than others. But it's also not without its challenges. You know, as we ramp up a more digital, inclusive, diverse opportunity around circularity for multiple supply chains to be going beyond the fence, it's fraught with some real risk and logistical concerns and challenges. Any additional thoughts on that point of view?
If I just add in, having criticised the World Economic Forum once, I would balance it by saying there's also the Circular Cars initiative that the World Economic Forum are currently operating. And I think that picks up some of your themes, Mark. Not all of them. I think you've gone further. And the Tesla example is a good one. But the Circular Cars initiative is, I think, identifying the role of remanufacturing as part of the product life cycle. And I'd recommend it to those who are watching this as an example of how companies come together to re-envision what that product is supposed to do for us, not just provide mobility, but other services too. And I suppose the other thing I should mention is that on resource efficiency, which I think is the side of the coin to your energy example, everything based around energy, I would say maybe resource efficiency. The new EU industrial strategy is to be published on the 28th of April. And I believe it's going to have a very strong principle running through it of resource efficiency. And that would be because of the arguments you've just given, Mark, about how we use that as we're looking for ever more resource efficient ways of delivering products. And that would include remanufacturing, of course, but it's also about the design of the product doing more than one thing. So I thought if that's helpful.
Yeah, that's terrific. That's terrific.
If I can build a little bit on that, David, in a way, I have a bit of a question for you in that, from a policy, from point of view of the role of policy, and I often go back to the report that the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership put together a couple of years back that identified the three major actors. The report's called Rewiring the Economy towards 2030, and it identifies policy or government, the private sector, and the world of finance as being the three major actors to bring us to this place of meeting the SDGs. Just generally having they use it. The analogy is a shipping analogy where finance plays the role of fuel, the government or policy plays the role of setting course, and the private sector is the engine. And I think it's a useful sort of visual in a sense to bring those actors together from the standpoint of traversing and going forward in a journey towards a reality that we want to manifest. And coming off of the conversation we had yesterday with UNIDO and Invest India and the Ministry of Commerce and Industry here in India, there was certainly multiple points of view brought forward in that a need for some kind of government or policy intervention is necessary. I think part of the concern is looking at it from the business point of view is a is an assurance of some kind or risk mitigation of some kind. It was talked about as, we will enter this when we see a pull, and by pull I mean sort of demand for remanufactured products. So there is maybe a need for some kind of priming the pump, so to speak, where the government could play a role. And I wondered if there's an example that you're aware of, or just historically in the way things have developed in the EU, if there's, it would be helpful to hear what that looked like in the evolution of not just remanufacturing, but broadly the circular economy, and how the government has supported not just setting direction, but also priming the pump a little bit, and also establishing what the boundary conditions are, that this is really the framework that makes the most sense if we've got to hit our goals from a circularity and sustainability perspective. I'm sorry, that was a very long question.
Okay, well, I'll give a short answer to it, and it's the Eco-Design Guide, our directive, from more than 10 years ago, created a framework in which energy-using products competed to be A plus, A triple plus. It's been very successful because the rules were simple-ish, and it set out what the goal was in a relatively narrow area. Very successful. Now, I think it's quite old-fashioned to think of a label now hanging on a product in a shop. But I think the modern equivalent of that is going to include more information about products with digital passports. So I personally think this is quite an exciting next step of what you do with the Eco-Design Directive to move beyond just energy. Sorry, Mark.
That's okay.
I know energy is, you're quite right, energy is a lovely denominator, but to move beyond that, ultimately energy will still be the metric, but I think that's where you'd start. That's the place I would start as a good example and to build on. Or Yorien, would you agree with that? I know it's a bit contentious.
Yeah, I agree.
No, that's helpful. Thank you. And so just to clarify, the Eco-Design Directive sort of, it sounds like, and I'm not familiar with it, but it sounds like it set what the boundary conditions for within which industry had to bring forward products that met those criteria. Is that a reasonable interpretation?
Yeah, and to score the products for their efficient use of energy. So you then get a label score, and that score then allows you to sell your product with a rating. And if you like,
didn't you have we spoke with each other during ICOR, didn't you have an example of that from France?
Yeah. So thank you. That was great prompting there. Thank you very much. And incidentally, those of you who haven't seen the ICOR conference, you should. I thought it was very well managed. Thank you, Yorien, for doing that. The example I've given about energy from the Eco-Design Directive from about 2008 onwards, the next stage may be driven by the right to repair movement, who are insisting on products being scored before you buy them as to whether they can be disassembled, repaired, whether the parts are available, if so, at a reasonable price. And the French government, in this area, as with so many similar areas at the moment, the French government has taken a lead and introduced this thing called the Indice de Réparabilité, so repairability index. And you can go onto the website, it's in French, and you can look up categories of product and see what the score is for the product you're about to buy. So I personally think that could be very helpful for remanufacturers as well in the future, not just repair at home people, but remanufacturers. And I think what we're seeing there is a trend of practically trying to turn the frustration of having products that just cannot be opened, cannot be repaired. You can't get the parts for them, even if they're made in a lighthouse factory, approved of by McKinsey. that frustration is being turned into practical steps to try to extend the life of the product, of which remanufacturers can be a part of the story.
I think this is such a good example because I'm looking at products in Holland, you always have an A to E rating, where A is green and the E is red, and that is the energy consumption rating. You never want to buy a product which is rated as an E, even though if you don't care about it, you just don't want it because you're thinking you're buying a bad product. If you also have this rating with the right to repair, you always want to be in the class A, B, or C because that's just the best product that you can get, or at least it's maybe it's not the best product, I think it is, but even if you don't care about it, I think there's something in your mind that you want to have that product. So this is a great a way to increase the awareness of the end user.
Yeah, and of course it levers a wonderful force of competition, because businesses like you, Yorien, they don't want to be providing products that are E rated or 1 out of 10 rated, so they try and make better products. And that competition is really the force that we want to release to get better products. And I think the scoring system is a way of doing that, in the way it was for the Eco-Design Directive in Europe, but now for the right to repair movement, pushing this agenda too, could be very helpful.
Yeah, I see that it's happening in the automotive industry also more often, that remanufacturers are already included at the design stage, so that some parts are not glued together, but they're screwed together, so that you can more easily remanufacture it instead of need to throw it away and replace it for a new part. So I know that in the automotive industry, this is kind of a trend coming up.
Yeah, and we've got companies like Vallejo, who are a member of the European Remanufacturing Council, and Volvo Cars have been very positive about that whole agenda for years. So I agree with that entirely. Yeah. And why shouldn't products that are made by companies like Lexmark carry a very clear signal that they've been designed for a long life? They've been designed where the business model brings back the product or part of the product to have its life extended. And at the moment, most of that is buried because, as Rajiv said at the beginning, that information isn't easily communicated at the point of sale. We need to find ways of doing that better, and that's the job of policymakers, to try to harness those drivers to produce a better outcome for society. And I definitely don't think the lighthouse is the way to do it, as currently.